Thank you very much. Let's begin. This is the appetizer. This is a chapel that I designed for a National Football League place kicker you probably haven't heard of. It is said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. At the risk of betraying one of my favorite literary characters, Puddleglum, I thought I might lead off with this feel-good note. Please note the date. This quotation by Charles Péguy postdates the major 18th and 19th century revolutions and civil wars throughout the European and American continents, but it predates the final cataclysmic 20th century blows to the vestiges of the old order. Paired with the topics of months of formative dinner conversations a quarter of a century ago on Quincy Street with the doctors David Schindler, Juan Serra, and Adrienne Walker, I find this quotation oddly liberating. Who could have foretold that I would have an opportunity 20-some years later to birth an architecture program from scratch in this era of tabula rasa? What follows is the backstory to the founding of a new architectural program at Benedictine College. Call it classical if you will, but I call it real. Our students learn about our inherited architectural culture, about the nature of building in an age of progress in which we are all called to be realists, about the myth of building for our time in which we are all called to be realists, and about the reality of what constitutes beautiful and consoling architecture for a deeply wounded humanity, for the body, mind, soul, and heart. It's the story of the founding of an architecture program that first wrestles with the questions of who we are and who we might become via the practice of the virtue of hope. The word anthropos in Greek may be associated with the concept of upward-looking being. This notion is echoed in various philosophical and theological discussions, such as the etymologies of Isidore of Seville, where humans are described as having been raised upright from the soil to contemplate their creator. Ovid poetically writes in the Metamorphoses, while the rest of the stooping animals look at the ground, he, the creator, gave the human an uplifted countenance and ordered him to see the sky and to raise his upturned face to the stars. In other words, humans are defined by their quest for knowledge, understanding, and connection with the divine, and they remake or recreate or recreate their surroundings in that image and likeness. And because I most often speak to and for our students, recreate is a fine word for that upon which you gaze. And yet human beings are free to choose in what direction they gaze. Hence the word Omphaloskepsis in the title of this talk, which I admit I've misused insofar as this Greek word means that type of navel gazing that may lead from an initial meditative practice to more contemplative habits. But perhaps I'm not completely off. According to the classic definition, Omphaloskepsis refers to the type of navel gazing that's used as a window to a world beyond everyday concerns. With humanity's primary gaze now downward into their personal palantir stones, or as Dr. Jeannie Schindler yesterday referred to as the rings of power, we are becoming beings that look down into a world beyond everyday concerns, beyond those everyday concerns that may bear sacred signs and symbols. In this sense, it's a gaze away from or out of reality. And when we look up, the negative effects surround us. The engines and transmission methods of the battery-driven New World Order of convenience and entertainment leave in their wake air pollution, ground waste, scarred swaths of earth, brownfields, etc. Trees are unceremoniously hacked so that the power stays on during natural storms. We feed our machines and let them have their rapacious way with the natural world. Technological progress, unstewarded, leads to unnatural or unredeemed post-lapsarian deviations between the beautiful, what a tree might look like, and the useful. Dietrich von Hildebrand writes that it is a fundamental lack of reverence to choose the useful for its own sake. It's a crime against that which distinguishes us from the animals. Many times, Scripture admonishes us to be aware of what's happening overhead, to be upward gazing. Alas, given no immediate emergency, we opt for gravity, the comfortable, the convenient, the ugly. And no, there is nothing that is comfortable, convenient, and beautiful unless it be given directly by God. Sunsets, bird songs, wildflowers, swimming holes, etc. Though fallen, we were and remain called from Genesis to be stewards created in the imago Dei, and that is in the image of the Easter Day gardener. Our garden. This is where we might build our tree forts and playhouses in preparation for going home, a place for coming to know, love, and serve God in this world so that we may be happy with him in the next. Alas, in the modern world of technological prowess and progress, of which we are all sons and daughters, I fear that our students shall never see a tree as lovely as a tree. Historically, what human beings affect is at a monumental scale indicates that which is sacred. An excerpt from T.S. Eliot's Choruses from the Rock. And now you live dispersed on ribbon roads, and no man knows or cares who is his neighbor, unless his neighbor makes too much disturbance. But all dash to and fro in motor cars, familiar with the roads and settled nowhere. Much to cast down, much to build, much to restore. I have given you the power of choice, and you only alternate between futile speculation and unconsidered action. And the wind shall say, here were decent, godless people, their only monument, the asphalt road, and 1,000 lost golf balls, except those aren't golf balls. For what will our generation be remembered? The great architect Leon Krier provides the sketch on the right of a similar sentiment as Eliot's, reminding us of the types of riches of the built environment that traditional cultures accumulate. Our digital treasuries create the images on the left. Where are our analog monuments and treasures today? These are the types of questions we ask our students. Looking to yesterday, the Parthenon, here reimagined by John Goodinson, dedicated to Athena Parthenos, the patron of the city, serves as a civic, religious, and financial monument. Its use as a treasury helped symbolize not only the spiritual dedication to Athena, but also Athens' political and economic dominance during the height of its golden age under Pericles. The Parthenon provides opportunity here to introduce Aristotle's four causes and their relationship to architecture. What is the material cause of what you're looking at, other than it's a digital slide? Stone, durability. The efficient cause, builders and sculptors, and history, the best of the building traditions that preceded it. The formal cause, designed by architects Ectinus and Callicrates, the building's idealized form, the essence, its gestalt. And the final cause, what is it? It's ultimately an offering to the patroness of the city, of the people. Unfortunately, all books that might coherently refer to Greek theories of architecture, that might satisfy some of the mysteries of these ancient orders, are lost to us. We know that the Greeks, especially under Pericles, were too pious and tradition-minded to have invented this. Form begins when a material is embodied, but to paraphrase the sculptor Adolf Hildebrand in his The Problem of Form, our perceptions of reality are not what is real. And trying to achieve a material realism that emphasizes only a particular rather than a universal falls flat. The Parthenon, consequently, has mystified architects for 2.5 millennia. The ancient Roman engineer Vitruvius, writing just before the time of Christ, tried to distill Greek architectural theory for us in his 10 books on architecture, the oldest known architectural treatise that we have. Well, he made a pretty good hash of it, and in the spirit of recovery, many Renaissance architects did their best to reconstruct it. 1,600 years apart, and with no fear of being eclectic or pastiche or naive, not of his time or unreal, Palladio agrees with Vitruvius on these defining characteristics of architecture. And if any one of these three is missing, the tripod, so to speak, of architecture falls flat. And that is that architecture must have strength, function, and beauty, or here interpreted as usefulness, durability, and beauty. Here I show you on the left a case study, not Palladio's, of an incomplete facade, the Church of San Petronio in Bologna. The facade was designed and started in 1538. Considering the Vitruvian triad, as well as Aristotle's four causes, what part of this is architecture? What part is merely building? And then what is ornament? What's the decoration? What's necessary? Could we strip this to find the true church? What might be taken away and still provide us with the essence of churchiness? The answers become clearer over the 4 years of our program. Please join. The long and short of it is, this facade on a public square is in the process of being dressed, on its way to becoming fulfilled as a church facade that fully prepares one for the mysteries within, as well as the glory of the city without. Like this. Another Renaissance architect, Leon Battista Alberti, in his 1452 treatise De Re Edificatoria, he writes, "Architecture is the art of building." So how do we manage to come to this clearly Italian church facade in front of you in 2009, 470 years later, and only 165 miles from Bologna? According to an article published in The Telegraph, the architect's design for St. Paul's Church in Foligno, Italy, was deemed problematic by Cardinal Gianfranco Ravasi, at the time head of the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Culture, only for its resemblance to a museum instead of a place of worship. But I'd like to argue, as I do with the students, that this building represents an architectural vice. How? In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle defines virtue and vice in relation to his concept of the golden mean. His definitions hinge on the idea of finding a balance between two extremes, or vices, one of excess and one of deficiency. Architecture, described by Stratford Caldecott as one of the servile arts, exists between the purely geometric and the explicitly figural realm. Historically, architects as chief builders were expected to be proficient in the skills of construction and geometry on one hand, and either painting or sculpture, ideally both, on the other. The Greek orders, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, operate at the architectural mean between geometry and figure. Or they represent the state of virtue in architectural design and expression. Two extremes outside of the range of what are deemed the classical orders are shown here: the purely geometric on the left, and the elephantine colossus as the tourist attraction on Coney Island, dating back to the 1880s. I'm sure you were curious. An example of virtuous architecture par excellence, with Chartres Cathedral, 1126 to 1252. The famous west portal of Chartres Cathedral, on which is written the story of the cosmos. This is architecture. The point of all this sculpture was to teach and to put people in the right frame of mind before entering the church, or as they walked past the church, or at any time. There was no wrong time for these lessons, but it was also to be beautiful, to delight. Called the Royal Portal, this illustrates Christ's cosmic majesty and humanity's redemption. The central tympanum depicts Christ in majesty. It's surrounded by the evangelists. We'll find the zodiac signs here. We will find in the left tympanum the Ascension, in the right the Incarnation. In the archivolts around these doorways, around the tympanum, are signs of the zodiac and the labors of the months. You'll also find representations of the liberal arts, symbolizing the harmony of faith and reason. The pagan does not threaten to pull us down when our gaze is lifted this high. Here is where we see the delicate integration of geometric framework in the sculptural figure. Jam statues give presence to Old Testament kings, queens, prophets, who emphasize Christ's lineage and unite divine authority, natural order, and human wisdom within salvation history. They are tall like the columns to which they are attached, and their elegance makes them look noble and otherworldly. Here we see John the Baptist on the left, a masterpiece of medieval expressionist carving. On the upper right, Pythagoras and possibly Priscian or Donatus. Lower right, a figure usually identified as Aristotle. A celebration of the cosmos, both the fane and the profane, a revelation in and of itself, and very much a mystery to modern man. The Church of St. Joseph the Worker, Salt Lake City, built in 2011, remodeled in 2019, described as a testament to the community's faith in the patron's patron saint. From a news article about the renovation, the church itself serves as an allegory for the Catholic pilgrimage through life. Starting at the main entrance, the faithful encounter the waters of baptism at a 7.5-ton black granite font. They proceed to the altar of brotherhood, where a skylight directs their gaze to heaven. Skipping a few. Plato's concept of the metaxy refers to the space or the condition between opposites, particularly in the context of human existence and the relationship between the divine and the moral, between immanence and transcendence, between the beatific vision and the world of matter, gravity, time. Who wears it better here? Stratford Caldecott writes, in Beauty for Truth's Sake, that an education for meaning would therefore begin with an education of form. The reenchantment of education would open our eyes to the meaning and beauty of the cosmos, as does Chartres Cathedral. As is his habit, he states with contemporary education on the left, meaning has to be forced. He continues, faith orients reason toward the transcendent, so that reason remains open to a light from above. Caldecott goes on to quote Pope John Paul II's encyclical on faith and reason, the intellect must seek that which it loves, the more it desires to know. And back to Caldecott, but unless we develop some sense of what lies above faith and reason, as well as what lies below, the art of flight will elude us. A disenchanted world is one viewed through the eyes of reason when reason is looking downward. In other words, navel gazing. Nasal would be good too. So what happened? In the prologue for this conference, we read, but what is the reality into which education introduces us? The American philosopher John Dewey describes the intellectual modification of the last few centuries as revolutionary because it has substituted a conception of the world differing at every point. Briefly, we're going to dip into a couple of paintings and then back to the architecture. Here's a more recent starting point for our revolutions. 1785, David's The Oath of the Horatii. To say that this image created quite a stir at the Salon of 1785 is a gross understatement. They knew it was different, that nothing like it had come before. It flattened the earth, so to speak. Diderot had been calling for virtuous art that would improve public morals through his art criticism and reviews of the Paris salons through the 50s into the 80s of the 18th century. You are looking at the product of a Baroque-trained artist turned virtue signaler. David was commissioned by one of King Louis XV's ministers to participate in a series of didactic paintings of French history with the instructions that the work should be allegorical and teach the citizens should be loyal to the state, or in France's case, the king. Arguably, patriotism and loyalty to the state are the message of the work. However, because the story is about a republican government, it came to represent the struggle against the king and the sacrifice needed to establish a republic modeled after Rome. It was a royal commission on loyalty to the state that backfired spectacularly, and it launched David's journey to becoming the minister of propaganda for a revolutionary government. Aside from the story within the painting, he created the first closed room. This is realism to the extreme. We see fine perspective, fine human figures, geometric form, Tuscan columns. What's not to like? But he gives us nothing beyond the horizontal message, nothing even beyond pure foreground. You can arrange this in a studio with real human beings, and they will walk away after holding these poses when the director calls end scene. Previously, he was an accomplished Baroque painter. These are two of his paintings. The Oath of the Horatii on the left, adjacent to The Funeral of Patroclus, painted in 1778, only 6 years earlier. Compare movement with lack of movement. He has flattened the old world of hierarchies and beauty and piety. He's already joined the revolution that would turn bloody in 4 years. Stratford Caldecott writes, the horizontal dimension encompasses the world we see directly, and the vertical allows for degrees of being and value, invisible realms, formal causality, and so on. But medieval man inhabited a three-dimensional cosmos, which has now been largely replaced by a flat universe with no ontological depth. This side-by-side comparison is what I had in mind when I named this presentation. The medieval world is still alive in the painting on the right. At the heart of realism, as shown on the left, is a flattened materialism. The image is canvas deep. David has reverted to sloganeering. This political billboard is the enemy of imagination. Why? The image on the left does not sustain study. He's designed a big room to create a snapshot. At first glance, everything is real, everything is correct, and yet everything is lifeless. The volume of the room becomes a character, and it sucks up the drama and the life. An architectural comparison from nearly the same period. On the left, drawings and designs by the architect Etienne Louis Boulet, who lived from 1728 to 1799. This is a presentation for a possible King's Library in the upper left, and the lower left is a cenotaph for Sir Isaac Newton. On the right about the same time, two works by the tradition-minded André-Jacques Gabriel, who lived 1698 to 1782, the Petit Trianon and his École Militaire. These architects are barely one generation apart from one another. And yet, perhaps you can start to see, although this takes some years with students, the difference between a flattened, literal, rational world of design and that of figure, depth, and messaging from the past. We're jumping ahead. Art and architecture, with short interludes of wonder and life, survived through the 19th century. But it gradually devolves through the 19th century revolutions across Europe and into the 20th century. By World War II, the dominant styles of architecture in the industrialized world were so flat as to become viciously aniconic, as in Vice. The various forms arose partly as a rejection of the old world's tradition, with their trappings of hierarchical societies and vestiges of ancient festivals. Partly it was incidental. An entire military-industrial complex had been created that aligned too well with the early 20th century art and architectural movements that advanced the new language of functional, abstract, and minimalist forms. In other words, the formal cause was materialism. Between the world wars, conveniently, the styles of avant-garde architecture employed the same materials and assumed similar forms as the war machines and bunkers, which had developed from 4 years of factory-supported supply lines on the Western Front. In many places during the world wars, the supply lines formed miniature pop-up cities. In medieval times, the only pop-up cities occurred at the building sites of new cathedrals. Stratford Caldecott again. Quote, "Most of us are prepared to let developments in science and technology dictate the shape of the future. We see our job as being merely to hang on tight, to survive, and maybe take whatever advantages are offered us along the way. But in the process, we begin to notice not only that we are damaging the earth and destroying our fellow creatures, but that we are becoming less than human ourselves." End quote. We have been reduced to producers and consumers. The three figures on your screen are considered the godfathers of the modernist movement, and definitely are the forefathers of architectural education in the United States and around the world, nonstop since the 1930s. There are the institutions that they took over, and as you know, if you take over Harvard, you get the world. And they are all revolutionaries, who in turn approached Hitler to be his chosen architect. Hitler summarily spurned them for the architect Albert Speer, whose work looked surprisingly similar to that of the revolutionary Boulez seen in the previous slide. The architectural history books cover for the lack of judgment by our three anti-heroes, and in proper fashion invert history by stating that these men fled a fascist regime for the freedom to spread their doctrines of liberty in the United States. Here are some quotations from our friends on the screen. Walter Gropius, founder of the Bauhaus. "We want an architecture adapted to our world of machines, radios, and fast cars. Let us desire, conceive, and create the new building of the future together. It will combine architecture, sculpture, and painting in a single form and will one day rise towards the heavens from the hands of 1,000,000 workers as a crystalline symbol of a new and coming faith." This is why I think it's important to spend a little bit of time with them. They're proposing not just the revolution, but the replacement faith. Mies van der Rohe, quote, "We reject all aesthetic speculation, all doctrine, all formalism. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, only today can be given form. Only this kind of building will be creative." Le Corbusier on the right, who didn't start a school, but his manifesto toward an architecture, or now translated as toward a new architecture, so it could get onto the shelves of the United States. This manifesto is read in every school of architecture, even today, including ours, but for different reasons. Corbusier, "In the last 50 years, steel and concrete have brought new conquests, which are the index of a greater capacity for construction, and of an architecture in which the old codes have been overturned. If we challenge the past, we shall learn that styles no longer exist for us, that a style belonging to our own period has come about, and there has been a revolution." Gropius and Corbusier's works have finally, only recently, received more public criticism. Psychologists and neurologists reveal an architecture clearly influenced by trench warfare, bunkers, and guard towers. Narrowing modernism down to two crucial figures, Corbusier and Walter Gropius, researcher Anne Sussman suggests Minimalist ahistorical buildings originated in part from autism in the case of Le Corbusier and post-traumatic stress disorder in the case of Walter Gropius. Modernism, they imply, was a path emerging from neuroses and one that never should have been rewarded, much less brought into our institutions. Gropius was shot at repeatedly in World War I, buried alive among dead bodies, and his uniform was riddled with bullet holes. In 1915, he earned respite from the war for insomnia caused by nervous tension, and then he was returned to the trenches. There seems little doubt that Gropius carried the weight of these experiences for the rest of his life. His post-World War I architecture, indeed, strongly resembles that of war bunkers. Le Corbusier was emotionally remote, aesthetically austere. His desire to reduce buildings into geometric components could be seen as a monomania, as evidenced by his own rhetoric, having once said, "I am possessed of the color white, the cube, the sphere, the cylinder, and the pyramid. Take the whip to those who dissent." Might we discover then that form follows dysfunction? A dysfunction perpetuated by the typical school of architecture. Now, these studies are of interest and useful, and admittedly, there is an attractive element to this argument, but there's a danger in mistaking only one piece of the puzzle for its entirety. I'm not going to dwell on what's coming up next here, Le Corbusier and the cult, because these can get down some deep wormholes. However, another book here on Walter Gropius's The Bauhaus came out recently. The Bauhaus is widely regarded as the 20th century's most influential art, architecture, and design school, celebrated as the archetypal movement of rational modernism, and famous for bringing functional and elegant design to the masses. But in this book, Haunted Bauhaus, art historian Elizabeth Otto liberates this history, uncovers a movement that is vastly more diverse and paradoxical than previously assumed, and it's praised. Otto traces the surprising trajectories of the school's engagement with occult spirituality, gender fluidity, queer identities, and radical politics. The Bauhaus, she shows us, is haunted by these stories. Well, here are various award-winning featured projects in architectural journals and websites from 2019 to 2024. None of these architects fought in a world war. They have no excuse. It's PTSD. I like to play a game with the students. Where in the world? And does it matter? If you don't already have one of these is on its way to your city. We're looking at projects in Denver, Houston, Dubai, Colorado Springs, Chicago, Hong Kong, Paris. Our freshmen begin their semester immersed in Kenneth Clark's 1969 BBC series Civilization, in which we have the quotation toward the end from Clark. At the very beginning of this series, I said that I thought one could tell more about a civilization from its architecture than from anything else it leaves behind. Architecture is, to some extent, a communal art. At least it depends upon a relationship between the user and the maker much closer than in any other arts. So I ask my students at Benedictine, what's the relationship between the user and the maker here? Is it not purely transactional? Is it not a how relationship rather than a why? I want our students to look for, produce, and incorporate into their designs the why. The only why in these projects is because we can. And then I ask our students, what is the truth exhibited here about the human condition? Stratford Caldecott tells us that 3 types of beauty are revealed in majesty, order, and loveliness. Do you see any of that here? And would you get away with bringing up the word beauty in a modern school of architecture? And the answer is no. This is what you're inundated with. Lots of words. This is purposely a very busy slide. In the typical school of architecture, the assumption and the quest all bear semblance to being real and responding to real-world problems and issues, but they get to identify the problem so that they can solve it. I will let you recall the definition of insanity. Maybe this will help. A real brick will shatter a window, but this will shatter every preconceived notion about brick the world has ever had. Get yours today. So when God is dead, his order is dead. Adam's naming system from Eden in the garden is dead. In the center, we have another great sketch by the architect Leon Krier, in which on the left, you have traditional drawings that children will draw In every culture in the world, you can find a YouTube video on this. I am a house on the left. I am a window. I am a house door. I am a roof. And on the right-hand side, call me. Fill in the blank. The search for a utopia is a natural response to the void left by the death of God. Without the transcendent moral order that religion provided, the quest for a perfect society became a way to address the longing for meaning, order, and fulfillment, and left the door open to multiples of ideologies. The absence of a divine moral authority meant that people had to create their own systems of ethics and purpose, often leading to the pursuit of utopian visions that sought to rebuild society on new and secular ideals. Here you observe the architecture of the multiple award-winning architect Rem Koolhaas. Again, Stratford Caldecott. Contemporary education, therefore, tends to the elimination of meaning, except in a sense of a meaning that we impose by force upon the world. Call me architecture. In the spirit of Pericles, Ectinus, and Callicrates, let a perennial question be asked from our students. What return shall we make to the Lord for all that he's given to us? And here we encounter the counter-revolution at the end of the 20th century, led by Thomas Gordon Smith at the University of Notre Dame in the School of Architecture. He removed it from the College of Engineering, replaced its modernist curriculum with a classical curriculum based on the writings of Vitruvius. Journalist David Broussard, you can see the title of his article here, writes about Thomas, he was too polite to call it a revolution. In his traditional building profile, he even dismissed the idea that the curriculum was really new. That is why I, David Broussard, have entitled this blog post Assertively Classical. I had contemplated aggressively classical in contrast to positively, because positive can connote politeness, which may well fit in with Smith's personality and modus operandi and that of most practicing classicists, but it will not serve new circumstances that may enable traditional architecture to challenge modern architecture's control of the field's professional establishment. And why Vitruvius, by the way? Vitruvius advocated that there were 12, in the writing just before the time of Christ, there were 12 personifications of the fields related to the liberal arts that the architect should study to develop balanced professional judgment: astronomy, writing, drafting, geometry, optics, arithmetic, history, philosophy, physics, music, law, medicine. And with all of that, the study of the human being and all its wonder, its proportions, its glory, was at the heart of his approach. And Leonardo da Vinci, 1400 years later, found it invigorating. Now we're moving on to some images of our student work, the final portion. As every renaissance in human culture has been triggered by the retrieval or the attempt at retrieval of something valuable out of the past, however imperfectly understood, and should even a figure like Michelangelo be able to come back and see what developments there have been in archaeology, he would be filled with wonder how off he was, but also how right he was. So too, we teach our students at Benedictine College to learn to trace and retrace our steps on the quest for wisdom that we have lost in knowledge. T.S. Eliot, in his essay Tradition and Individual Talent, writes of the poet, which for this we may substitute art, artist, architect. What is to be insisted upon is that the poet must develop or procure the consciousness of the past, and that he should continue to develop this consciousness throughout his career. What happens is a continual surrender of himself as he is at the moment to something which is more valuable. The progress of the artist, or architect, is a continual self-sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality, end quote. And yet with this extinction of personality, we find the recipe to create something ever ancient, ever new, and with soul. Recall the image of the hacked tree for the convenience and comfort of our daily habits. Kenneth Clark writes in Civilization, "We are aware of a spiritual force that the ancient world never knew." He's writing about David's head, the sculpture of Michelangelo. "I suppose," he writes, "that this quality, which I may call heroic, is not part of most people's idea of civilization. It involves a contempt for convenience and a sacrifice of all those pleasures that contribute to what we call civilized life." And what a great paradox our students experience, this sacrifice of their own pleasures, their own friendships, their own social life often, And a final quote from this, taken from Michael O'Brien's The Awakening Imagination. Because art, and architecture for our purposes, has an inherent restorative power, and furthermore, because it always has an authoritative voice in the soul, we must trust that over time, works of truth and beauty, created from authentic spiritual sources, will help to bring about a cultural reconfiguration and a reorientation of man. The question we need to ask is not so much what sort of surgery should be applied to the sick body, but what are the first principles of health? And to this effect, a small side note, daily at 3 o'clock, our studios stop, and we pray the hour of known together from the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary. At BC, we like to think of ourselves as one of the, well, we're looking at just finishing up a few more of the, this is the Student Fall Gallery, where we collect much of the greatest hits over the past year and have an open house. In closing, we like to think of ourselves as one of the pilot-like programs, quiet, hidden. We keep our wicks trimmed, waiting to ignite the next Renaissance, waiting for the next patrons, knowing that the true light is here and here. In deference to the smallest of lights 2,000 years ago, Jerome's painting The Age of Augustus. These days, as then, our help won't come from the church, nor a politician, nor an executive order, nor a software developer genius. It will come from a spirit of self-sacrifice and a strewing of comfort, and it will come from Christ. Our architecture students sacrifice their time, talents, social lives, popularity, creature comforts, etc., to recover aspects of what Kenneth Clark in Civilization calls his requisites for a thriving culture: intellectual energy, freedom of mind, a sense of beauty, a craving for immortality. And our students work and pray even as they play this most ancient of games. Thank you.